Welcome to Alien Whisper, where sizzling hot alien women and emotional sci-fi alien stories await you. If you enjoy thrilling adventures between humans and extraterrestrial beings, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below the video. Now let's dive into the story. In the year 2150, humanity had clawed its way into the stars, staking claims on distant worlds. Novatera was one such foothold, a jagged, windswept planet circling a far-off sun, its crust laced with novacite, a rare crystal capable of storing energy to sustain cities for centuries. This prize turned Novatera into a magnet for predators, none more relentless than the Galactic Resource Corporation, an alliance of alien warlords and human profiteers obsessed with hoarding the galaxy's riches. At the heart of Novatera's Defiance stood Jack Harris, the colony's chief engineer. He was a man of few words, his quiet demeanor often dismissed as a sign of meekness or indifference. To the untrained eye, he faded into the background, overshadowed by louder voices. But those who knew him, those who'd seen his mind at work, understood the truth. Beneath that still surface simmered an intellect as sharp as a plasma blade, always plotting 3 moves ahead. Under his steady hand, Novatera's research team edged closer to a breakthrough, a prototype that could channel novacite into an energy shield stronger than any alloy in the known galaxy. If it worked, Novatera would become untouchable, a wildcard capable of upending the cosmic pecking order. The GRC descended with an offer cloaked in generosity, cutting-edge technology, and a fleet of warships to protect Novatera, all for the modest price of exclusive novacite mining rights. The fine print, however, painted a grim picture, one where Novatera's resources would be gutted, its people reduced to serfs under corporate rule. At the negotiation table, Jack sat motionless, his gaze drifting over the GRC delegates, a motley crew of glossy-scaled aliens and humans in razor-sharp suits, their arrogance practically a scent in the air. They viewed humanity as upstarts, barely worth a footnote in their grand designs. Jack's silence fed their disdain. "This one's harmless," a reptilian delegate hissed, mandibles clicking with mockery, loud enough for the room to hear. But Jack wasn't merely listening. He was dissecting every word, every twitch of a scale or flick of a cuff, a fragment of the mosaic he was building in his mind. Their deal wasn't just a trap. It was a death sentence, a slow bleed that would leave Novatera a hollow shell. He'd seen offers like this before, though no one at the table knew where or when. Later, behind the sealed doors of the council chamber, he unveiled his strategy with a voice so steady it bordered on unnerving. "We can't trust them," he said, his eyes fixed on some unseen point beyond the room. "Their deal's a noose, tightens the longer you wear it. We stall. Keep the prototype buried. Finish the shield. That's our edge." The council faltered, their faces tight with unease. The GRC's fleet hung in orbit, a shadow pressing against Novatera's thin atmosphere, a threat that didn't need words. Even Dr. Lena Patel, the shield's lead designer, shifted uncomfortably. "Jack, if they suspect we're hiding something," she began, but he cut her off with a glance, sharp and unreadable. "They won't," he said simply, though the faintest pause before his words left a crack of doubt in the air. His track record was ironclad, a string of quiet victories no one could argue with, and it tipped the scales. The council voted to follow him, agreeing to stretch the talks while the research team toiled in the dark. Thus began a game of shadows. Day by day, the GRC's patience frayed. Their delegates' smug grins faded into murmurs, then sidelong glances. Why did this human say so little? Why did his eyes linger, as if peeling back their skins to see the machinery beneath? Captain Elena Vasquez, Novatera's steely fleet commander, caught Jack staring at a discarded GRC data chip one evening, turning it over in his hands without a word. "What's on your mind, Harris?" she asked, her tone half teasing, half wary. He didn't answer, just slipped the chip into his pocket and walked away, leaving her with a chill she couldn't shake. They didn't know, none of them did, that Jack Harris's silence wasn't weakness. It was the hum before the storm, the coiled tension of a trap about to spring. Deep beneath Novatera's scarred surface, in a lab carved from rock and shielded from prying eyes, Jack Harris and his team were bending the laws of physics with Novasight. The energy shield prototype, codenamed Bulwark, was nearing its final form. Each test pushed it closer to perfection. A shimmering dome of raw power that could render Novatera invincible, a testament to human cunning in a galaxy that sneered at their existence. But power like that came with a shadow, and one late night, during a pivotal test, that shadow grew teeth. The team had been at it for hours, tweaking the shield's energy flow. Jack stood at the control console, his eyes locked on the flickering readouts, his fingers hovering over the controls with a stillness that felt almost unnatural. Then it happened. A jagged spike of power tore through the system. The lab shuddered as uncontained energy lashed out, sending a pulse rippling through Novatera's thin atmosphere. Sensors across the colony blazed red, alarms screaming in protest. The team scrambled to kill the surge, voices overlapping in controlled panic, but Jack didn't move. He just watched the screens, his expression unreadable, as if he'd expected this all along. The damage was done. The pulse was too loud, too bright to go unnoticed. High above, aboard the GRC's orbiting flagship, technicians pounced on the anomaly like hounds on a scent. The energy signature was undeniable, wild, potent, unmistakably Novasight-driven. It bore no resemblance to the rusting tech Novatera was meant to limp along with. Marcus Reed, a human operative assigned to monitor the colony, was hunched over his station when the data hit. His screen flared. Anomalous energy discharge detected on Novatera. Source unknown. His breath caught, a jolt of adrenaline sharpening his focus. This wasn't a malfunction. It was a crack in the facade, a glimpse of something massive. Marcus had signed on with the GRC years back, lured by promises of credits and clout. But the shine had worn off as he watched the corporation hollow out worlds like Novatera, leaving their people as husks while the GRC's coffers swelled. Duty still tethered him, though, enough to forward the report to his superiors. Yet he kept a copy, a quiet rebellion flickering in his chest. Something about this felt different, dangerous. Sleep eluded him that night. The surge gnawed at his thoughts, whispering possibilities. What if Novatera had built something to defy the GRC's stranglehold? The idea was intoxicating and lethal. If the corporation sniffed out advanced tech, they'd raise the colony to ash without a second thought. Marcus wrestled with the weight of his loyalty to the GRC and a nagging admiration for Novatera's stubborn grit, a spark he hadn't felt in years. By morning, he made his move. Under the pretense of routine system checks, he slipped into Novatera's network from his perch on the GRC flagship. He bypassed his clearance limits with practiced ease, slicing through encrypted files and test logs that clashed with the colony's sanitized reports. There was, buried deep, a project-tagged Bulwark. The name hit him like a cold wind, a fortress, a wall. If it ran on Novasight, it could be a shield no fleet could crack. His pulse hammered. This was real. He should have reported it. His contract demanded it. His survival hinged on it. But his hand froze over the transmit key, caught in a storm of doubt. What if Novatera could stand tall? What if humans weren't just fodder for the galaxy's games? He had to know more, had to see it with his own eyes. That evening, driven by a tangle of curiosity and guilt, Marcus breached Novatera's defenses. His GRC training made short work of their security, tight but not tight enough. He ghosted through the lab's corridors, a shadow among shadows, until he reached the core, a cavernous chamber awash in the ghostly glow of Novasight crystals. There it stood, the prototype, a dome of energy pulsing with a life of its own. Jack Harris was at the helm, adjusting controls with a focus so intense it bordered on eerie. His face gave nothing away, but his hands moved with a precision that spoke of secrets. Marcus lingered in the dark, his mind racing. This was at a pivot point. In GRC hands, it had become a cudgel to smash more worlds into submission. In Novatera's, it could rewrite the rules. He couldn't let the corporation claim it. Not yet. Stepping into the faint light, he spoke, voice low but firm. Jack! Jack whirled, his hand snapping to a tool on his belt. A reflex too quick, too deliberate. Recognizing Marcus, he eased back, but his eyes stayed sharp, probing. Reed, he said, voice flat as slate. What the hell are you doing here? I know about Bulwark, Marcus replied, holding his ground despite the weight of the moment. And I know what the GRC's got planned for this place. Jack's gaze tightened, a scalpel slicing through Marcus's words. And what's your play with that intel? Marcus exhaled, locking in his choice. I'm in. I'll help you. But we're on borrowed time. The GRC's already sniffing around, and they don't wait long. Jack didn't blink, his silence stretching taut, a wire ready to snap. Marcus felt it. The same quiet that had unnerved the GRC delegates now turned on him. Finally, Jack tilted his head just enough. All right, he said, his tone clipped. But if you're running a game, Reed, I've got moves you won't see until they hit you. Marcus cracked a faint, bitter smile. Fair enough. Let's just say I've got debts to settle with the GRC, ones they don't even know about. An alliance took root, fragile and unspoken, poised to test the GRC's might. But in the dim glow of the lab, neither man noticed the faint static hum from a console corner, a signal too subtle to catch, threading its way off-world. The air in Novatera's command center crackled with unspoken dread. For weeks, Jack Harris had walked a razor's edge, stringing along the Galactic Resource Corporation's demands while his team raced to perfect the Bulwark energy shield. Marcus Reed's intel had bought them a fleeting reprieve, but time had run dry. Now, above the colony, the GRC's fleet tore through hyperspace. A constellation of warships, their hulls glinting like bared fangs. From the bridge of the flagship, Commander Varkes, the GRC's reptilian warlord, fixed his slitted eyes on Novatera's fragile silhouette. They've mocked us long enough, he hissed, scales flaring under the bridge's harsh light. Burn them to cinders. The assault hit without prelude. Plasma bolts and ion lances screamed through the void. A tempest of fire aimed to gut Novatera's core. The colony's patchwork defenses, cobbled relics from humanity's early days, should have folded instantly. But as the first barrage struck, a deep hum pulsed from the planet's crust. Novacite crystals, buried in secret veins, roared to life. A radiant dome of energy erupted over the colony, swallowing the GRC's onslaught in a shimmering cascade. The Bulwark shield stood firm, its surface dancing like molten glass under a storm. Jack Harris stood rooted at the command console, his eyes glued to the tactical display. A flicker of something, relief, or perhaps calculation, crossed his face, gone before anyone could pin it down. It's holding, he said, his voice low, almost too calm, like a man who'd already seen the outcome. They'll push harder. Be ready. On the GRC flagship, Varkes' mandibles snapped in rage. What trickery is this? He snarled, slamming a clawed fist into his console, cracking its surface. Their technology is a century behind ours. Grayson, his human second-in-command, pored over the sensor data, his face ashen. It's a shield, sir, Novacite-powered. It's eating our fire like it's nothing. This shouldn't be possible. Then break it, Varkes roared, his voice a guttural lash. All ships, maximum output. Find a flaw now. The GRC fleet unleashed hell, their weapons blazing with desperate fury. The Bulwark glowed brighter, its edges trembling under the strain, but it held, a monument to Jack's foresight. Yet he knew the shield was only half the equation. The GRC would dig for weaknesses or simply grind Novatera down through sheer attrition. To win, the colony had to bite back, and bite hard. Launch the interceptors, Jack ordered, his voice slicing through the command center's controlled chaos. Do it. Hidden hangars yawned open across Novatera's surface, and a swarm of sleek, Novacite-fueled warbirds surged into the sky. These weren't the lumbering freighters of the colony's past. They were predators, engineered for speed and precision, their engines pulsing with the same eerie light as the shield. Captain Elena Vasquez led the charge from her ship, Nova's Fury, her voice sharp over the comms. "All right, team, let's carve these corporate leeches to pieces. Target engines, comms, weapons. Hit fast, don't blink." The Novateran ships darted through the GRC fleet like knives through silk, too agile for the lumbering warships to track. They struck with surgical accuracy, crippling engines and shattering weapon arrays. The GRC's formation buckled, ships drifting as systems sputtered. But the true pivot came from a shadow no one saw coming. Aboard the GRC flagship, Marcus Reed crouched in a maintenance corridor, his fingers dancing over a terminal. For days, he'd woven a web of subtle sabotage into the fleet's systems, biding his time. Now he struck. With a flurry of commands, he turned the GRC's communication network into a howling mess of static, orders dissolving into noise. Then, he injected false data into their targeting systems, twisting their aim until weapons fired wildly, some slamming into their own allies. Panic erupted on the flagship's bridge. "What's happening?" Varkes bellowed, his roar nearly lost in the wail of alarms. "Why can't we sink?" Grayson, sweat beading on his brow, clawed at his console. "Our systems are corrupted. Comms are dead. And our guns, they're hitting our own ships." Marcus's heart pounded, but his hands were steady as he sent an encrypted pulse to Jack. "Harris, it's Reed. Their comms and targeting are scrambled. They're blind for now. Hit them with everything. And watch your back." Jack's eyes narrowed at the message, his jaw tightening. Marcus had delivered, but that last warning, "Watch your back," gnawed at him. Was it caution or a veiled threat? He'd never fully trusted Reed, and the man's shadowed past loomed larger now. "Understood," Jack replied, his tone clipped. "Stay alive, Reed." He turned to the comm officer, his voice like steel. "Signal Vasquez, all in assault. End this." Nova's Fury and its squadrons surged forward, weapons blazing with unrestrained fury. With the GRC's defenses in disarray, the Novateran ships wove a deadly dance, dismantling one warship after another. The flagship reeled as a precise strike gutted its engines, its massive frame lurching, lights flickering across its hull. But in the command center, a new alert flashed on Jack's console, a faint signal buried in the noise of battle, emanating from Novatera's own network. Jack's eyes flicked to it, his expression unreadable. "Patel," he said, not looking at Dr. Lena Patel, "check the secondary relays." "Now." Patel hesitated, her hands trembling. "Jack, we're in the middle of—" She stopped under his gaze, sharp and unyielding, and hurried to a terminal. "There's a signal," she stammered. "It's encrypted outgoing. I don't know how." "Trace it," Jack snapped, his comm cracking for the first time. His mind raced. Someone was leaking data, someone inside. Had Marcus played him? Or was this something else, something he'd missed? The signal's origin was deep within the lab, tied to the Bulwark's core systems. A cold realization hit. The surge weeks ago hadn't been an accident. It had been bait, and someone had taken it. Varkes, his composure in tatters, barked a final command. "Retreat. All ships, fall back to the rally point." His voice dripped with venom, but survival trumped pride. The GRC fleet, battered and broken, staggered into hyperspace, leaving Novatera's skies clear. The command center erupted in cheers as the Bulwark's glow dimmed, its work complete. Vasquez's voice crackled over the comms, triumphant. "They're running, Harris. We did it." Jack exhaled, his shoulders easing, but his eyes stayed locked on the console, on that faint, treacherous signal still pulsing in the system. "We won the battle," he said, so softly only Patel heard. "But we're not done." His voice carried a weight. Pride, yes, but laced with something darker, a warning that the real fight might still be lurking within. For now, Novatera stood tall, a beacon of human defiance against the Titan. But Jack Harris's quiet resolve, the same force that had turned back the GRC, now turned inward, hunting a shadow that could unravel everything. The scars of battle clung to Novatera's surface, but a restless energy pulsed through the colony. The Galactic Resource Corporation's retreat had shattered the myth of their invincibility, and Jack Harris was determined to forge that triumph into something enduring. When the GRC, battered but still dangerous, sent a curt request for talks, Jack saw more than a chance to secure Novatera's future. He saw a move in a game few others even knew was being played. He assembled a tight-knit team for the negotiations. Captain Elena Vasquez, whose razor-sharp instincts had turned the tide in battle. Dr. Lena Patel, the brilliant but jittery architect of the Bulwark Shield. And Marcus Reed, the former GRC operative whose betrayal had shifted the scales, or so it seemed. Their destination was Nexus Point, a gleaming space station orbiting the gas giant Zephyr. Its interlocking rings of habitat modules spun in silent grace, linked by transparent conduits that framed the planet's churning storms below. The station thrummed with life, traders, diplomats, and wanderers from across the galaxy weaving through its corridors, unaware of the stakes about to unfold. Inside the conference room, holographic star charts cast a ghostly glow across the polished obsidian table. Jack sat at the head of Novatera's delegation, his posture deceptively relaxed, his eyes sharp as a blade's edge. Vasquez stood to his left, her uniform crisp, exuding quiet menace. Patel clutched a datapad, her glances darting nervously toward the GRC team. Marcus, positioned as a technical advisor, wore a mask of neutrality, but his fingers tapped once, twice, on his thigh. A tick Jack noticed but didn't acknowledge. Across the table, Commander Varkey's scales shimmered under the artificial light, his mandibles twitching with barely restrained fury. Beside him sat Ms. Evelyn Crow, the GRC's chief negotiator, her tailored suit as precise as her reputation. Her gaze locked onto Jack, probing for cracks, but found only a wall of calm that seemed to unsettle her more than Defiance would have. Crow broke the silence, her voice smooth yet laced with venom. "Let's not waste time, Mr. Harris. Your little stunt cost us ships, resources, and face. We're prepared to let it slide if you meet our terms." Jack leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "Name them." Crow slid a tablet across the table, its screen glowing with a contract. "Exclusive rights to Novatera's Novasite deposits and full schematics for your shield. In return, we'll grant Novatera autonomy under GRC oversight." Patel's breath hitched, her knuckles whitening around her datapad, but Jack's raised hand stilled her. "Oversight is just a polite word for chains, Miss Crow," he said, his voice low, deliberate. "Novatera bled for freedom, not a collar. If you want a deal, start with sovereignty." Varkey's growl reverberated, a low rumble that set the air trembling. "You dare set terms? Our fleet may be wounded, but we can still grind your rock to dust." Marcus stepped forward, his voice calm, but edged with ice. "Can you, Commander? Your ships are crawling back to dry docks, and your supply lines are threadbare. Novatera's shield is up, and we're not sitting idle." His eyes flicked to Crow, unyielding. "You need Novasite to recover. Another war's a luxury you can't afford." Crow's gaze narrowed, pinning Marcus like a specimen. "And who exactly are you?" "Someone who's seen your playbook up close," Marcus replied, meeting her stare without flinching. "Bluffing won't work here." Jack seized the opening, his tone steady but carrying an undercurrent of steel. "Our offer. Novatera sells Novasite at market rates. Profits split to fuel our growth. We'll share select technologies, excluding the shield, for joint ventures that serve both sides. You recognize Novatera as a sovereign state and sign a non-aggression pact." Silence gripped the room, Jack's words hanging like a blade ready to fall. Crow leaned back, her fingers drumming a slow rhythm on the table, her mind clearly racing. Varkey's mandibles clicked in a frenzy, but he held his tongue, cowed by Crow's sidelong glance. After a taut pause, Crow spoke. "Exclusivity on Novasite for 10 years, plus access to your research labs." Jack's head tilted, a faint smile ghosting his lips, gone so fast it might have been imagined. 5 years, and only for projects we greenlight. Our labs stay ours. The negotiations became a high-stakes dance, each offer and counteroffer tightening the room's tension. Varkes, at one point, surged to his feet, slamming a clawed fist on the table. "This is madness. We should seize what's ours." Crow's hand snapped out, gripping his arm. "Sit, Commander," she said, her voice a whip. "We don't repeat failures." Hours bled into one another, the air thick with unspoken threats. But Jack remained a still point, his silence between responses more unnerving than his words. Vasquez caught it, the way his eyes lingered on Crow's tablet, as if he'd already read its code, or the way he glanced at Marcus when the operative spoke, measuring something no one else could see. Patel, meanwhile, seemed to shrink under the pressure, her datapad trembling in her hands. Then, midway through a heated exchange, a faint chime sounded from Jack's comm device. He glanced at it, his face betraying nothing, but his fingers paused, a heartbeat too long. Marcus noticed his own expression tightening, and Vasquez's hand drifted closer to her sidearm, instinct prickling. The signal was from Novatera, a low-priority alert, but its timing felt wrong, like a whisper from the shadows of the battle's aftermath. Jack pressed on, ignoring the chime, but his next words carried a new weight. "You're not just negotiating for Novasite, Miss Crow. You're buying time. Your board's breathing down your neck after that route. Sign the treaty, or you'll be explaining to them why you lost more than ships." Crow's eyes flashed, but she didn't deny it. The deal coalesced: full sovereignty for Novatera, a fair Novasite trade agreement, and a framework for limited tech collaboration. Both sides would gain, but Novatera would stand free. As the delegates signed the digital documents, Jack's hand moved with practiced ease, though his gaze lingered on Marcus, who avoided it, staring at the star charts instead. Outside the conference room, Vasquez clapped Jack's shoulder, a grin breaking through her usual steel. "You played them like a deck of cards, Harris." Jack's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "It's not about playing, Elena. It's about knowing what's at stake." His voice was soft, but his eyes flicked back to the conference room, as if tracing an invisible thread left behind. Back on Novatera, the treaty's announcement ignited celebrations. Streets pulsed with music, lights blazing brighter than the stars above. But in the command center, Jack stood alone by a viewport, his reflection stark against the endless black. Novatera was no longer a speck on the galactic map. It was a force, a proof that humanity could rise through ingenuity and defiance. Yet as he stared into the void, his comm chimed again, the same low-priority alert from the negotiations. He opened it this time, his face unreadable. The message was brief, a single line of encrypted code, tagged to the Bulwark's core systems, the same source as the signal he'd traced during the battle. Someone, or something, was still whispering to the GRC, and the signature wasn't Marcus's. Jack's jaw tightened, his silence now a blade of its own. The galaxy had heard Novatera's voice, but the quiet engineer knew the real war wasn't over. Someone close had played a deeper game, and he'd find them, before their next move brought the stars crashing down. 6 months had passed since Novatera's treaty with the Galactic Resource Corporation, and the colony had transformed into a beacon of human ambition. Where barren outposts once weathered relentless dust storms, sleek towers now pierced the sky, their lights fueled by the Novasite that had nearly spelled Novatera's ruin. Academies thrived with curious minds. Medical bays pulsed with cutting-edge tech, and research labs stretched the limits of Novasite's potential. Hope hung heavy in the air, a quiet proof that humanity could not only endure but flourish when guided by purpose and unity. Jack Harris walked through the central plaza, his boots whispering against polished stone. At its heart stood a statue, a figure frozen in contemplation, one hand raised as if measuring an unseen weight. The plaque read, "Jack Harris, the silent engineer, whose quiet resolve shaped our destiny." He paused, his lips twitching into a faint, almost sardonic smile. The silence that had once been his armor was now Novatera's emblem, a reminder that power often hid in the spaces between words. In the command center, Marcus Reed greeted him with a curt nod, his eyes betraying a flicker of something. Caution, perhaps, or calculation. "Morning, Jack," he said, gesturing to a datapad. "GRC sent specs for the next joint project. They're pushing for faster Novasite reactors, but I've got a hunch we can outmaneuver them." Jack's eyebrow arched, his gaze piercing. Outmaneuver how? Marcus's grin was sharp, almost too practiced. "Efficiency tweaks, nothing flashy, but enough to tilt the next trade deal our way. Let's just say I've learned a few tricks from you." Jack studied him for a beat too long, his silence heavy with unspoken questions. "Good," he said finally, his tone neutral but laced with an edge. "Make sure they see the value of partnership and nothing else." Inside, Dr. Lena Patel was immersed in her work, her team orbiting a holographic model of a new shield generator. "Jack, you've got to see this," she called, her voice bright but tinged with nervous energy. "We've stabilized the matrix. These generators could shield entire fleets, not just planets." Jack's eyes flicked to the hologram, then back to Patel, lingering as if searching for something beneath her enthusiasm. "That's a leap, Lena," he said, his voice steady yet warm, almost too warm. "Package the data for the GRC team. Show them what collaboration looks like, but keep the core specs locked down." As the day unfolded, Jack found himself tracing the threads of their journey. The GRC had seen Novatera as a carcass to be stripped, its people as dust beneath their boots. But in the quiet, in the sleepless nights of planning, the calculated restraint of every move, Novatera had rewritten the script. They'd shown the galaxy that humanity's strength wasn't in bluster or brute force, but in the discipline to listen, to see, to strike only when the moment was right. That evening, as Novatera's sun sank, painting the sky in streaks of fire and shadow, Jack stood on a balcony overlooking the colony. Marcus joined him, and for a moment, they stood in silence, the city's lights flickering to life below like stars answering the dusk. Marcus broke the quiet, his voice low, probing. "I used to think silence was a flaw, you know? In the GRC, it was all about who could shout the loudest, who could break the room. But you, Jack, you taught me the quiet ones are the ones who rewrite the rules." Jack's gaze stayed fixed on the horizon, where the first stars pierced the twilight. "Silence isn't about being still, Marcus," he said, his voice soft but carrying a weight that seemed to pull at the air. "It's about seeing what others overlook, hearing the things they drown out. In a galaxy screaming for control, silence is how you carve your own path." Marcus nodded, but his fingers twitched, a faint echo of the tick Jack had noticed during the negotiations. "So what's next for Novatera? For you?" Jack's smile was faint, almost elusive, as if he were answering a different question. "We build. We show the galaxy that humanity doesn't just endure. We shape what comes next. And we watch, always watch, for those who think they can outplay us." The words hung between them, rich with promise but edged with warning. Marcus's expression tightened, just for a moment, before he masked it with a nod. Below, Novatera glowed, a testament to the power of quiet resolve and the unyielding spirit of its people. But as Marcus turned to leave, Jack's calm chimed, a low, insistent pulse, the same encrypted signature that had haunted him since the battle. He opened it, his face a mask of stone. The message was a single line: "They're still listening. Core systems compromised." The source was the Bulwark's deep network, buried in the lab where Patel spent her days. Jack's jaw clenched, his silence now a storm of its own. The galaxy had bowed to Novatera's rise, but the silent engineer knew the truth. Someone close was still playing a game, their moves hidden in the quiet he'd taught them to wield. He'd find them, before their whispers brought the stars crashing down. And somewhere, in the shadows of Nexus Point, a figure watched a feed of Novatera's glowing city, their voice a murmur lost to the void. "You think you've won, Harris, but the board's bigger than you know.